To help our guests meet their time schedule, I know they do need to leave. I'll start the meeting and we can take a quick roll call.
Yes, please.
Okay.
If you could call roll.
March 25th, HRB.
Oh yeah, I got it. It's March 25th. It's approximately 6:10. If we could start our work session.
Okay. Bob Seward.
Here.
Derek Metzen.
Here.
Chair McLaughlin.
Here.
So I'd like to introduce to you Brandon Spencer-Hartle and a guest, which I forget the name of right now, so I'll let you introduce yourself when you get up, with Restore Oregon. They're a advocacy nonprofit to advocate for historic preservation statewide for Oregon, and they made a presentation to the City Commission last week about two of the items they're working on this year, and I think they're really important for Oregon City. So when he offered, I jumped to the chance to have him come and talk about their organization and what they're doing.
Awesome.
So I brought extras, so feel free to grab more than one if you'd like them.
Thank you.
I did get two. No, I didn't.
So I'm here tonight to talk about two distinct yet similar initiatives that Restore Oregon is embarking on. For those of you who don't know, our organization was founded in 1977 as Historic Preservation League of Oregon. And about 10 months ago, we went through a rebranding process to find our new name and identity as Restore Oregon. So I'll talk to you for about 10-15 minutes, and then we can entertain conversation and follow up on some of the initiatives that we'll talk about here tonight. And as Christina mentioned, I had the fortune of speaking with the City Commission last week, and so it'll be good to give you a very similar but slightly different presentation than we presented to them. So for those of you who are not members or haven't been members in the past, Restore Oregon is the statewide partner of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. We serve the role as the statewide advocacy and education nonprofit for historic places. We consider ourselves a hub for preservation in Oregon, hosting events, but also relaying the good work of communities out around the state. We hold conservation easements on 43 historic properties around Oregon. Conservation easement is the one tool available to permanently protect a property against demolition, alteration, significant remodel. And we like to think of ourselves as a liaison between local communities and the preservation-related initiatives in Salem and Washington, D.C. So the first initiative I want to talk with you tonight about is an initiative that we embarked on about a year ago to identify, advocate, and find solutions for Pioneer Era properties. And for our efforts, we've described Pioneer Era properties as those buildings built between 1841 and 1865 in the Willamette Valley. These are properties that you know well here in Oregon City, but other communities aren't as versed as you probably are. So about a year ago, we announced Pioneer Era properties of the Willamette Valley as one of Oregon's most endangered places. For the better part of the last 3 years, we've received phone calls and advocacy requests from around the Willamette Valley about properties from this era that were in a state of demolition by neglect, or were being demolished, or whose futures were uncertain. So after kind of repeated phone calls and a increasing awareness of the rarity and significance of these properties, we listed them as one of Oregon's most endangered places. That effort has kicked off the specific work items I'll talk about tonight. So we know by 1865, more than 60,000 people had arrived in Oregon, and we know that they built at least 4,600 buildings in the Willamette Valley alone. Today we're down to 255 buildings from that period, which is about 5.5% of what was here in 1865. The map on the left, you'll see red dots are buildings that have been demolished since the last survey efforts. So that's anywhere between the last 10 and 30 years. But on average, we're losing somewhere between 1 and 5 buildings a year from this period. So our study kicked off with an understanding of the earliest known Pioneer Era property, the 1841 Lee House in Salem. And what we sought to do in our initial understanding of this category of buildings, which again, we'll talk about how it fits into Oregon City here in a minute. What we sought to do is get a good understanding of the development sequence of Pioneer Era properties in the Willamette Valley, because these are the homesteads and the buildings that people built at the end of the Oregon Trail. They follow a typical sequence. So we see buildings that are sort of log cabin, early rudimentary buildings, which we have very few of. And then in the 1860s and 70s, or 1860s and late 1850s, people would build a lumber house. Your history here in Oregon City is a little earlier than most of the Willamette Valley. But in general, this is the development sequence of buildings from this period. We see several different construction styles in these buildings, and you see these different styles represented here in Oregon City and in Clackamas County. The earliest buildings were log and hewn log buildings. The hewn frame building is probably the most common construction type of this period. And then by the 1850s and especially 1860s, we start to see balloon and stud wall construction. Again, because Oregon City was connected, if you will, earlier, we see some of these building technologies happen here earlier than the rest of the Willamette Valley. So here's a representative sampling of the types of buildings we're talking about, the styles of buildings we're talking about. Again, we have about 255 in the Willamette Valley. They fall neatly in a few stylistic categories, but of those 255, there are about 100 that have been significantly altered. Many of them have been, Victorianized or Craftonized or updated in later period styles. So I just want to share a couple of examples of, again, the visual of what these properties look like on the street. Here are some of our earliest properties. Here's more of our typical federal and classical revival style buildings. Again, you guys know these well here in Oregon City. And then we get into some interesting buildings in the late 1850s and early 1860s with a few Italianates coming online and quite a few Gothic revivals. One of the things that isn't specific to Oregon City, but you do see in Clackamas County, is we have rapidly disappearing farm groups. So we have, like I said, 255 properties that still stand, but we're down to 23 agricultural buildings from that period, so barns or fruit sheds or other outbuildings. And of those 23, we're losing about one a year. So we're down to the smallest, 0.5% of agricultural buildings from the early pioneer period. Again, I don't think that there are any in the city of Oregon City, but there are some in Clackamas County. So I wanted to give a little demographic breakdown of how these properties fall in the Willamette Valley and what you have in terms of your inventory here in Oregon City. There are 44 standing resources in Clackamas County from the pioneer period. About half of them are listed on the National Register. How that stacks up to other counties, we use the number of donation land claims that were issued as our baseline. Again, you have a little different history here with properties that were developed before donation land claims, and you have urban properties that some other communities didn't have. And here's a listing of the buildings in Oregon City from the pioneer period. Again, most of your buildings are listed on the National Register, which in this community provides some level of protection and understanding, but you have several that have yet to be designated. And here are some in the surrounding areas in Clackamas County. And one of the things that we've been watching, again, we watch closely, is the loss of these properties. Here are properties that have been lost in recent years. And the Carmen House, which you may or may not be familiar with, is in Lake Oswego and is potentially on the track for demolition. But in terms of your properties here in Oregon City, we only have one from Oregon City that's been lost, and I'm not sure if this is even in city limits of Oregon City.
Which one is it?
The third one, the McCubbin House,
I think that's outside the city limits.
right outside. So as we have been familiarizing ourselves with this group of properties, we've been asking the question of what threatens these buildings and what's relevant to consider at the local level. Of course, we have an urban development pressure, both for increase in density inside the urban growth boundary, but also an expanding urban growth boundary that still affects the context, but also the inherent challenges of these properties. One of the things we see broadly, both in urban communities and in rural communities, is owner apathy. So we have owners who either their families go back long enough on the property that they don't understand the broader significance of that pioneer era asset, or they just don't care. I think in Oregon City you have a greater awareness and a greater amount of public support and education than other communities. But I think from our perspective, at least in Clackamas County, there's still work to be done. The biggest challenge, and one I'll talk about here in a minute, is that these properties lack viable economic opportunities. They're difficult to repurpose. They have a high degree of interior and exterior fabric that's from the period. They're typically small buildings, 900 square foot to 1,000 square foot is an average, and they lack insulation, they lack modern conveniences that people want, and they're difficult to put additions onto or enlarge in size. There are land use issues, again, both inside and outside of urban growth boundaries. There are building use issues, and then our sort of biggest threat is deferred maintenance and neglect. Here are a couple older photos and more recent photos of Pioneer era resources in Clackamas County. So what's been done? We listed this group of properties as a most endangered place as a way for our organization to take a high-level look at their preservation and reuse and the challenges that they face. We conducted a 9-county historic resource survey in the spring and summer of last year that gave us that number, 255. We've authored a 65-page context statement and preservation roadmap. And the part of what's been done that's probably most relevant to this commission is that we conducted a multiple property documentation form, which essentially acts as an umbrella National Register nomination vehicle. So for those properties in City of Oregon City and in Clackamas County that aren't yet designated on the register, the application process is now easier and more streamlined for listing those properties in the register, because that multiple property documentation form says that this group of 255 properties is significant as a whole and not just individually. What's still to come? You're the 6th Landmarks Commission we've given this or a similar presentation to. What we'd like to do tonight is just make you aware of our efforts in the Willamette Valley and to start to build a relationship with this group as we move forward. We will undertake an intensive level survey of the remaining barns here this summer. We'll coordinate with planning departments, primarily in other cities, to ensure that their databases are up to date and that they've flagged properties from the Pioneer era. The part that'll be, I think, fun, and one we'll do here in Oregon City, is we will host 6 Preservation Pub lectures. We have a University of Oregon faculty member who will deliver a 45-minute presentation about why these properties are special and important, and we'll entertain a group conversation about how they can be reused and the challenges these properties face, all in a group hub sort of informal setting. Those will happen in the late spring and summer, and we're looking at having an event in July here in Oregon City. We'll have an open house and tour of a Pioneer era property that's undergoing rehabilitation in Forest Grove. And then something that we'll definitely share with you is we will undertake 3 replicatable reuse studies. So we'll look at a cross-section of Pioneer era properties, none in Oregon City, but 2 in Marion County, that will help us understand the economic realities of rehabilitating these buildings and the economic opportunities that present themselves within our market here in the Willamette Valley. So we have a consultant team that'll prepare those studies between now and August. And we'll be working with the media to secure OPB, Oregonian, sort of major media stories on this topic. So that's what I wanted to talk about in terms of Pioneer era properties. At the end of my presentation, we can come back and talk a little bit more if you'd like. But our goal was to make you aware of our efforts at the high level on behalf of these properties and to let you know what's coming and what's ahead, and to encourage you to think, not that you don't already because this is Oregon City, but to think a little bit more critically and think more broadly about the future of these properties. The second thing I want to talk to you about, and I'll be relatively brief on this, is the sort of the final product of 4 years worth of research and advocacy work our organization has been doing in coordination with the Oregon Main Street program. I don't know that any of you have come to one of our preservation roundtable conversations, but over the last 4 years we've held a series of charrettes in Main Street communities around Oregon to get input on the economics of historic districts, compatible infill, and the challenges associated with unreinforced masonry buildings. And this past January, so 3 months ago, we released a report that calls for a state rehabilitation tax credit for Oregon. And this was the product of 3 years worth of hearing from property owners, planners, preservation advocates that Oregon lacks sufficient financial incentives for the rehabilitation of our commercial downtown buildings, that the cost of seismic upgrades, ADA access, and the bigger internal systems were far in excess what our current incentive programs and what our current market will justify. You probably are already aware, for properties in Oregon, we have 3 sort of buckets of incentive programs right now. There's the federal rehabilitation tax credit, which is a 20% tax credit for commercial buildings that are on the National Register, and a 10% tax credit for commercial buildings that are built before 1936 and not on the register. Because of the minimum spending requirements for that program, it's difficult for smaller Main Street scale projects to qualify. So when we look at the roster of projects that have taken advantage of the credit, they're largely in Portland. We have the state special assessment program, which will freeze the assessed value of a National Register property for 10 years, contingent on minimum rehabilitation expenses. But even though that's a state program, it's essentially paid out of local coffers because it's property tax revenue. And then at the local level, we have urban renewal, we have local Main Street programs, business improvement districts, local improvement districts, programs that are tailored to their local communities. And we get calls probably 2 to 3 times a week from property owners who ask about grants. And as you're probably aware, there are very few grants available for private property owners. So when we look at our roster of incentives, the one level of government that's not putting money into the pot is the state. For those of you who haven't seen the research out of the National Trust and the National Park Service, the economic impact of the rehabilitation tax credit, the federal tax credit, is undisputable. And in Oregon, over the last decade, 2001 to 2011, there were 77 projects that generated $524.6 million in rehab expenses and created 8,500 jobs. Those are projects that took advantage of the rehabilitation tax credit. So of the 41 states that tax income, 34 offer a rehabilitation tax credit. One state, Texas, does not have a state income tax credit, and they use their rehab tax credit on franchise taxes. But the rest of those orange states up there have state rehab tax credits. The vast majority of the states have passed their rehab tax credits in the last 5 or 6 years. Last year alone, 3 states joined the roster of states with state rehab tax credits. And California is looking at adopting a rehab tax credit likely in the next year. So what you'll see in the report that I passed out is we did a redevelopment study for a hotel in Albany that showed the need for a rehabilitation tax credit, and it demonstrated that private funding alone would not close the development gap to allow for this project to be seismically upgraded and reused as a mixed-use hotel and rental residential complex. That use is identified by city plans going back to the 1980s for this building, but what's held this project up is that private funding alone can't overcome the barriers of building infrastructure costs. Just a couple of selected examples from other states. In Missouri, when they passed the state rehab tax credit, it doubled the amount of federal dollars coming to their state through the federal tax credit program. In Kentucky and many other states, the credit more than pays for itself. And in Virginia, over the last 10 years, 1,200 buildings have been rehabilitated, creating over 10,000 jobs. What it would achieve here, a rehabilitation tax credit would restore and reuse more buildings. We think it would activate Main Streets. We think it would be a stimulus behind our local Main Street efforts. We think that this program would boost the number of buildings that are seismically upgraded, made compliant with ADA, and built for modern systems. And we have a vision that this credit program would be simple and straightforward, so that small Main Street scale property owners would be eligible to apply. So where we're at with all of this, like I said, we published this report in January that says we think this is a good direction for Oregon. We've organized a steering committee of former legislators, policymakers, property owners, mayors, to help us through a political process here over the next 8 months, to draft legislative language, to find legislative sponsors, and to work towards introducing legislation in the 2015 session. And where we're at tonight is we wanted to give this commission a heads up about our effort. We wanted to give you literature about what we're thinking and let you know that we'll be back to talk to you in 3, 4, 6 months to get your support and to get your buy-in on a couple of different concepts for what the credit would look like. So I'm happy to talk more, answer questions, let you guys go get dinner, but I think we wanted to come down and just build a little bit more of a relationship with you and let you know some of the big initiatives that we're working on that would affect properties here in Oregon City.
I was curious, what is the subject of the conversation in July, and who are you bringing up from U of O?
So the subject, what we're calling it a preservation pub, and the title is Oregon's Oldest Buildings. And Liz Carter, who's adjunct faculty at U of O and a board member at Restore Oregon, We'll talk to the development sequence of pioneer era properties. How were they built? What types of tools were used? How those hand-hewn buildings were constructed in the 1840s and 50s here in Oregon. We'll walk people through what makes these buildings special and what makes them important in the state's history, and then talk a little bit deeper about the challenges that they're facing. We'll also be joined, I think you may know him, Paul Falsetto, a local architect who formerly was at Carlton Hart and has done projects here in Oregon City. Paul will help us talk through that economic piece.
I had a question. The reports on one of the slides, the 3 reports, are they accessible to look at or online, or
They are, and you'll
these
notice
guys?
they
Right there.
have our old moniker on them. They're available online. If you go to our website and go to the advocacy tab,
Okay.
you can download them there. They're PDFs. If you can't find them, just email me and I'll send them your way. We've got hard copies too if you'd like them.
Awesome.
Yeah, these are great.
Mm-hmm.
I look forward to reading through those.
Yeah, thank you.
Well,
very
thanks so much for the opportunity to come down. And we're membership based, but we'd love to just have your email addresses because we send out every 2 weeks preservation news from around Oregon. And we're trying to do a better job serving that role of being a hub of local, state, and federal preservation activities here in Oregon. So we look forward
Can you
to
sign up for the newsletter on the website?
Can. It's easy.
When did you rebrand, change?
Live.
Last year.
So it still feels new.
Very good. Wow. I believe some years ago, is it Peggy? Came before the board and talked about this? Was it this?
I don't remember. Sorry.
I'm pretty sure on the Clackamas board when I was on it years and years ago. I remember her coming and talking about it. I thought it was this board, but maybe I'm wrong.
I think you're maybe aware we listed the Ermitinger House as one of our most endangered places 3 years ago. And so we've gotten to know Christina really, really well over those 3 years.
And that listing has been fantastic as a galvanizing tool. So I'm really excited when they started that process because that was really what we needed in Oregon City to move forward with Ermitinger.
Yeah, and thank you, by the way, because that
Yeah.
certainly helped in
Mhm.
acquiring grants and funding for
Yeah.
the renovation of that building.
Definitely kick-started.
And one thing I'd like, the Mutual Love Fest here, but one thing I really appreciate about Restore Oregon is while they're an advocacy group about preservation, but they also are they're an advocacy group to make sure preservation can happen. You know, they're really trying to dial down into the economics of preservation and how do we honor and restore our buildings, but also let them live in the 21st century. And there's the practicality of it I really, really like. So I've been impressed on that, how they've kind of presented that, and I think that's also a way to bring a lot of people along because they're not seen as the save everything in time, lock your building up and don't touch it because if you do anything, you'll destroy it. So they do a very good balance between, I think, that the notion of preserving history, but also how do we reutilize these buildings.
We're here as a resource if ever we can add to a discussion you're having or connect you with other organizations or property owners who have gone through challenges that you might be facing locally.
Well, thank you very much for coming.
Yeah. Thank you.
This is awesome.
Yes.
All right. Does anybody else have any other questions?
Mm.
Okay. Thank you. Was there anything else?
Well, I have a couple of communications. We have a little bit of time. We can take the communications section after the hearing, and if Chair, you could give me 5 minutes, that would allow us to just address the land use application when we reconvene at 7 o'clock.
So you want to talk now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then all we have is just that, and then we can be done.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Just wanted to give you some update on Preservation Month. As you know, May is Preservation Month with the National Trust, and we do 2 things in Oregon City. We have we usually do the Preservation Award as well as the Preservation Photo Contest. We've done 2 years. This will be the 3rd year. I had a recent meeting with Karen Morey with Clackamas County Historical Society to talk to her about the photo contest, and some good news. We have a sponsor for the prize money this year, Citizens Bank, and we're ready to move forward because the way the May works for our city commission. It's May 7th is the first city commission meeting of the month, so we probably will do a presentation to the city commission at the second meeting in April, so in late April, announcing the photo contest. And then probably this May 7th meeting will announce the preservation award, as well as have the mayor read the yearly proclamation that we do for Preservation Month. So on your end, I just wanted to let you know that it's happening. For the Preservation Award, look for an email from me probably sometime next week to start soliciting ideas for nominations. And we'll kind of work through that process and figure out who our 2014 Preservation Award will be. Remember, it can be both for honoring new construction and infill development, or honoring buildings that have gone through rehabilitation, or have been kind of honoring property owners who have had particular high upkeep of their historic homes, or even to honor a person that, or a couple that have been dedicated to preservation in Oregon City. So it's a really wide open process. If we have a second place person with enough kind of votes to support, we have done, awards of merit or a second award, so that's fine too. So it's really open to the board to think of kind of creatively what you'd want to do this year.
Got to think about it.
You don't have to decide right now.
No, but I have been thinking about it though.
Yeah.
Thinking it's like popped up with some things last year that,
So in years past, we really have a nice balance, I think, between infill and existing historic buildings and a couple people. So
yeah, I always like to see if there's a way to do a person and a thing.
yeah, and because we don't have rigid categories. If it doesn't work one year, we aren't bound by
Right.
trying to find somebody.
Yeah.
I think that's about really all I have. That's kind of because an Old Oregon Photos is also, they work with Clackamas County Historic Society on printing their photos. They've also offered to pay for the printing of the photos, of the 3 award-winning photos. So for the most part, we have, and then on my time as well as some copying costs, I think we're down to a pretty lean, well-replicated photo contest. So I'm happy about that.
Is there anything for next month?
We do. We have Mike's Drive-In is looking at making a small modification. It needs to come back. They are looking at purchasing Peter Ing's infill lot between their building and the Farr Brothers store. So it's going to
Gotcha.
slightly shift the building a little
Where
bit.
are we talking?
If you picture Mike's Drive-In.
Oh,
there's
Mike's Drive-In,
there's
that
an
little
empty-
teeny skinny lot?
Yeah.
Something wants to go in there?
They're looking at purchasing that for a future phase addition and slightly moving the building over and looking at a bigger parking lot. But they're also, because of that, looking at making the awning on 7th Street return around Monroe. So that's going to be coming back for a
Nice.
modification.
Oh, so they're going
They're
forward.
going forward with the site plan design review, but because the approval didn't have that slight movement and then
Did they get
wraparound.
approved with everything else?
No, they are currently in the site plan design review process.
Because of that.
Because of that.
So they've delayed it on their own.
Yeah, they delayed on their
volition.
own, so we're fine. So
it.
they're requesting, they need to do a modification to their previous approval. So the board will see the line items of what's being modified into requests for approval.
Part of that is them potentially buying that property, so that's all contingent.
Right, but they're looking at slightly shifting the building and looking at a future phase, which they would
Gotcha.
come out of, that would come even later. But this, because of the shifting, is going to move the building slightly and having that return.
Would that require a public hearing again?
Yeah, it will.
And then that's it, or something?
That is it, as far as I know.
That would be next month.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, is there anything else?
Those are my
So-
2 big updates.
So at 7, we can just deal with this, and
Yeah.
some of us can resume spring break.
Yeah, I know. Well, or my son's 4th birthday. So, yeah.
That's right, and it's my brothers, both my brothers that are twins' birthdays today, but they're much older. Okay, so we'll break for a bit, and then.
Okay.
Oh, are you waiting for somebody?
His clients.
Oh.
They showed up at 6:10. I told them to come back at 7.
Well, we'll get started.
Yeah.
I don't
So-
think they need to hear my presentation.
No, so we can go like 7:03. Christina, should I?
You can do the land use
Okay.
notice.
So I start?
Yep.
Okay. We'll now commence the public hearing on agenda item PC 14-030, HR 1403, a request for approval of new construction at 512 7th Street. The criteria for approval of a land use action are contained in Chapter 17 of the Oregon City Municipal Code. The proposed development must comply with applicable provisions contained in the City of Oregon City Comprehensive Plan. Generally, unless otherwise noted, if a request is found to be consistent with the municipal code, it is considered consistent with the comprehensive plan. If you wish to participate in this hearing, including challenges for bias or conflict of interest, you must complete the sign-in form located on the table at the front of the room and deliver it to staff. Please do so immediately. The chair will only recognize those who have submitted complete forms. Testimony will be taken in the following order: applicant, testimony in favor, testimony in opposition, rebuttal by applicant. When recognized by the chair, please come forward to the podium, give your name, address, and make your statement. All testimony, arguments, and evidence presented regarding this request must be directed toward the applicable criteria or other criteria in the plan or land use regulation which the person believes to apply to the decision. Please address only the applicable criteria for the decision. Please do not repeat testimony. If you wish, you may choose merely to agree with the previous speaker's statements. An issue which may be the basis for an appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals shall be raised no later than the close of the record at or following the final evidentiary hearing. Such issues shall be raised and accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the Commission and the parties an adequate opportunity to respond to each issue. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision makers and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. Failure of persons to participate in the public hearing, either orally or in writing, precludes that person's right of appeal to the City Council or LUBA. Written testimony submitted prior to the hearing constitutes participation in the hearing. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues related to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the decision maker to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Prior to the conclusion of the initial evidentiary hearing, any participant may request an opportunity to present additional evidence, arguments, or testimony regarding the application. The Commission shall grant such request by continuing the public hearing pursuant to the standards contained in ORS 197.763. Do any of the board members have a conflict of interest or ex parte contact regarding this application?
No.
No.
Who has visited the site? Okay, so we'll turn it over to staff.
Thank you, Chair McLaughlin. I'll briefly tonight go through, the elevations of the building and some of the couple of items I'd like the board to have discussions with at the end of the presentation. This is a proposal for new construction in the McLaughlin Conservation District. It's also simultaneously going through a Type 2 staff review, SP 1408. And as you recall, in previous applications, such as Mike's Drive-In, in Oregon City, we have this bit of a bifurcated process. The site plan design review is more of the development review application, whereas the historic review kind of is the aesthetic review to see if the proposed new construction meets the design guidelines that the board has adopted for new construction, as well as the historic review board overlay zone of 1740. This is the proposal is to replace a new construction on the location, which was until 2007 the Walter Little building, and in your staff report you'll see a photo of it. It was a false front historic building built in the 1890s, and it also, like the applicant's proposal, has a two-story building and then a small one-story addition. And the Walter Little building was flipped the other way, whereas this applicant's proposing the one-story section in the interior of the lot. But I think it's a really great kind of homage to what was there with a slightly different style. As you can see from the site plan, the applicant is utilizing the existing, the existing tax lot that was the Walter Little building was on. Generally the same, close to the same footprint. In the back area, it will be access to a small parking lot. This existing parking lot is not part of the project. It is just this interior lot. This is a 3D view of the front of the building, looking at it using a streetcar commercial design standard, streetcar commercial architectural style. You'll also see the side elevation, which actually is nicely showed the existing billboard, which will remain. That's actually on the other property. And the applicant, for many reasons, has chosen to move forward with more of a kind of a party wall design aesthetic and utilizing some vines and kind of planter areas along the side, as well as two windows on the second floor elevation. And they're going to be asking for support from the Historic Review Board from the Site Plan and Design Reviews standards for a 30% ground floor transparency, which would be kind of in this area. Knowing that this there may be a new building added on to, and that they have the ability to build out to the property line with this configuration, rather than having to pull it back for firewall questions and firewall issues, as well as the transparency. They're requesting kind of support from the Historic Review Board that this wasn't a traditional approach to a historic building to have the interior wall not have ground floor windows. This again shows a little farther away. We're on the intersection of 7th and Washington. You kind of see this is the two windows on the second story, and this is the applicant's dental practice, and the ground floor would be for a commercial or office use. And you'll see looking at a treatment on the ground floor for visual, but once again having no ground floor transparency on that elevation. Here we are on 7th Street looking up the hill, and this is the Oddfellows building, which the Todd Eiselen, the applicant's architect, has utilized as kind of the scaling for this building. Here are some architectural plans showing materials. Once again, this is that side elevation. And this is the rear elevation. I'll let Denise McGriff from the McLaughlin and Neighbor Association speak more on this, but there was some question about the use of cement board siding from the rear, and we have allowed that for new construction for commercial buildings in the past, and the knowing that this could have traditionally been wood for the rear of a commercial building, staff is supporting at the time, though there is some question about using this board and batten approach, so I'll kind of leave that for the direction of the board and hear more comments from Denise McGriff with the McLaughlin Neighbor Association. But as a material, we have supported use of cement board siding in commercial buildings previously. This is the elevation. It's kind of hard to see a little bit, but if you were going up 7th Street, this would be the Howells building that's right next door. So this is just the second store peeking up. Shows the ground floor tenant space. So once again, this is the kind of one-story massing, and then here's the two-story massing. Once again, staff is recommending approval. I think this is a very good application, and it's a very good use of how to implement our design standards for new construction by utilizing the streetcar commercial design standards with some flexibility. It's not a exact replica of what you see on 7th Street, but it alludes to the form and massing you would see from this type of architecture. And that is all I have right now, so I'm open for questions, and I'll leave it back on.
Can I ask you a question
Mm-hmm.
on that side elevation? That one.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I'm just for educating me, if a building went in next door to that, would those windows have to be eliminated?
I think there
Because
was
of
a
firewall
contingency opportunity for that to happen.
I mean, it would have to happen because it becomes a firewall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll let the applicant speak more about that. But the site plan design review standards is for ground floor transparency. The site plan design review does not look at the second story transparency. That's kind of up to the market to decide, but it's the ground floor transparency. And I think the applicant, I don't want to speak too much for them, they felt with the combination of the existing billboard and knowing that this may be an addition at a later date, what kind of questioning the purpose of putting some ground floor windows right here, knowing that this has kind of been designed to be added onto in the future.
May I go see the floor plan?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then can you go that elevation again?
So I'll show you this elevation as well as the 3D version.
As far as if there were windows on that elevation, would they have to be similar to the ones upstairs, or are you just looking for glass?
No, I
Or-
think at the site plan design, so take your historic hat off for a
Yeah.
second. The site plan design review standards require 60% ground floor transparency on the front elevation, 30% ground floor transparency on the side elevations, and 0 is on the rear. And the 30% is measured linearly, and it's at pedestrian height. So imagine a window at pedestrian height. If you have a 100-foot depth, you would need 30 feet of windows, just for simple math.
But
At pedestrian height.
here
Yeah.
down.
I call myself the typical pedestrian, so it's about 4 to 6 feet is the general.
Is where that's. I was thinking something more of a higher kind of.
That would not count for the.
Yeah. Okay. Any questions, you
I
guys?
don't have any questions for staff.
Okay, thanks. I don't have any things to, if
Oh, well-
anybody wants to talk or, I mean, the applicant can come forward and state your name and address and,
Iceland with Iceland Architects, 1307 7th Street, Oregon City. I appreciate Christina's presentation. I think she kind of went through it, and I'm sure you guys have all looked at it in the packet that you have in front of you. I'll answer any questions you might have, but it sounds like the transparency is an issue that we do need your support on. And the reason we're not doing anything is we know those windows will have to be filled in the future. It is anticipated that that adjacent site will develop. We do have a schematic design for it, which we may do in the future,
I'll have to add this as Exhibit A in the record.
which would build it out to the corner.
who owns this property?
Mike and Lana Vespali.
Oh, so they own this adjacent property as well?
They purchased the other property after we had already begun the design phase. They
Gotcha.
just recently acquired it. But because of the parking that's needed, we initially were looking at leasing other parking spaces within the neighborhood. And then this property became available, so they will lease it to themselves as parking for the time being, until such time that parking requirements change or that it becomes economically viable to build some kind of a structured parking or something in the area. But we're hoping that would happen within the next 10 years, and that's why we do not want to put windows on that side. Plus, it is right on the property line. We'd like to build out the full envelope, which is what would have been done historically on the property.
Can I ask, there is, up there, between the blue and the white on the side, is that an elevation change that's reflected on the elevation but not?
Yeah, we're still learning the program.
Okay.
But there is a deceptive amount of fall on the site. There's
Okay.
about 4.5 feet from the back to the front.
Okay.
Or, yes, the other way, actually.
Okay.
It's very deceptive. And then we also have about a foot along the sidewalk along 7th Street. So we have it set up on the inside at the main level, so it's on 2 levels. But, well, 3 levels if you count the rear. But we also wanted to set it up so it could possibly be leased to a single tenant with some steps in the interior as well.
So it's not likely that there would be an interior connection between this building, phase 1, let's say, and then the corner building?
Actually, there could be.
Okay.
Actually, that's actually better suited than the site we're building on right now. There's less grade change there.
I had an aesthetic question. The herringbone
Mhm.
pattern, when it says brick B
Mhm.
and on the elevation plan, is that the lighter brick or the
That was going to be the lighter brick.
which I assumed it was, but it didn't say that on the diagram of the brick.
We had a color board that was submitted.
Yeah, but it just says the colors, but not like brick B or, which
That-
I figured it'd be the white stuff.
That was the lighter,
Yeah,
yes.
I just wanted to verify it.
And then that's also the reason for just the painted CMU wall along the property line, knowing that that would be a property line wall.
Right.
We did do some ornamentation along the cornice up there just to give it some definition there.
I much prefer the elevation drawing to the conceptual. Gives better detail.
You can go back. You can, if you want.
I guess the only issue is you're wanting findings for that based on what could happen in the future instead of what reality is, and which is now.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
I think the idea is,
I get it.
oh,
Master plan.
yeah,
I mean,
and
that's what you're saying,
and
right?
it helps for planning staff to help make they're going to
Right.
do a request for a modification, and a finding by the historic review board is helpful
Right.
for planning staff.
And then, Todd, in the rear elevation, is that just a bunch of windows around what I saw in that rear elevation with that window with a door? There you go.
Yes, that would be a storefront entry, and that would be the entry for the upper level.
Oh, kind of like a foyer sort of thing.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
Go look at the plan, you'll see there's a elevator,
The elevator's somewhere in the okay.
elevator lobby
there.
here, and then we do have a connection from the front to the back, but upstairs will be the medical office. Christina said dental, but it's actually a medical office.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And the Hardy in the back is mainly a utilitarian thing.
Yes, it is, and
I mean, it's a tertiary space.
right. And we have the board and bat down low, just because it is a little more durable, we find. And this area, over on this side here, no, it's not working.
You can grab the mouse. If you take the mouse, it'll point to it.
It's pointing to it on the screen here, but
Should do it.
You lost it.
Move it up off the top of the screen. That should go up.
If it makes you feel better, I
Okay.
haven't seen it through this whole presentation.
No.
anyways, on the left side, as you're looking at it there, that's where the garbage enclosure is, and it's all very, we want it to be durable, utilitarian type.
But really, Hardy's Hardy. It's Hardy Lap's not any more or less
That's true.
durable than.
But we also wanted a little variation on the back to break it up a little bit.
You could put brick.
We're running out of money.
And then on the front elevation, the lights that it's difficult to see, but it's kind of a light sign combo thing
Yes,
where it says wall-mounted blade sign with lighting,
yes.
but there's no detail on that. It wasn't in the packet.
Should have included that, I guess. We do have a detail of that, but I didn't bring it with me.
And the light fixtures that are in the two upper herringbone columns,
are,
engaged columns, those lights.
Kind of a cylindrical fixture. Not really cylindrical, but half cylindrical.
Yeah, I don't.
Sconce type.
Um, yeah, that would have been good to have some sort of detail and lighting to see what those are. Everything else,
We have those for a site design review, but I didn't
I can bring them up
add them.
if you want them. Here,
Okay.
you have access to the server.
you got pictures?
There it is.
You see it now.
Oh, what were you doing?
Sorry, I was just curious to see what they look like. Other than
Let's go find them.
you do have them though.
Yep, I have access to our server, so we'll just add this as an exhibit B, and I'll print it out. So let's find you.
Into killing. The lights that are under the soffit. Oh,
Yeah.
they're not seeing them.
That's really weird. Why not? No, that was very weird. There you go.
These are just standard recessed cans that are in the soffit at the front entries.
Oh, the two projecting entries.
Recessed entries,
Yeah.
actually.
All right.
And that was a side building, just a standard wall pack, a little more decorative than most. But
This is the sconce.
that's on the side of the building, on the
So-
parking lot side. So I think the next one would be the.
I just want to do the parking lot. So those.
Above the trellises.
Oh, these little
Oh,
rectangles.
there, I see 'em.
Gotcha.
Okay. So let's.
And so essentially you're proposing the trellises in lieu of windows. to
Correct.
around that side.
Yeah.
And we have a substantial amount of glazing at the rear, which is not a requirement. So we're hoping that we can trade all of those things.
Oh, there's
This is
the-
the-
Those are the upper ones?
Mhm.
Was that an up and down light or just down?
It is up and down.
Okay.
You may not be able to get the up, just so you know, for our full cutoff.
It is cut off at the roof.
Oh, okay, fantastic.
We had the lighting engineer look at that.
Mhm.
And then this is a sign that is going on the blade signs out front.
That
There'll be
light's-
one of those on each side of
That-
a blade sign
That
that
hits
shine
the
down.
hits the sign, I guess.
Right, they shine down on
Yeah.
the sign.
Okay. Got it.
Parking lot light.
Oh yeah.
So I'll just put this whole cut sheet into the record.
Yeah, I just wanted to see what they look like or what they're doing. Got it.
And those are, I mean, if you have other ideas, I mean, those are just what we're proposing at this time. But
And like for the signage for whatever goes there, is that just going to be some sort of a metal?
It's a metal
something?
bracket with a wood sign. It'll have two little 2x2 angles that support a wood sign.
Yeah.
that
Okay.
comes down.
I'm just curious. Detail. Okay. Does anybody else have any other questions? Okay. Thank you. Do I have anybody else that wants to speak? Denise?
Thanks, Todd.
Good evening,
Thank you.
gentlemen. I hope you all saw the lovely rainbow as you were coming in.
No, but you brought it in with you.
John, you know,
What a guy.
I just love John. Who doesn't? Anyway, I just wanted you to know Rich Wilhelmi is here also with me this evening. He's also a member of the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association Steering Committee. I'm Denise McGriff, McLaughlin Neighborhood Association, and we had originally submitted our comments to you way back in February, and we're here tonight to lend our support to H.R. 1403. As we stated, Todd came to our meeting and talked to the members about the proposal. And a couple of things I want to say that while we did have a discussion about the Hardy panel on the back, Todd gave a very good explanation about why that would be more appropriate because it is on the alley, it is a utilitarian entrance, and people are a little hard on buildings when they're in the rear where there's parking, even though there's a curb stop. So we feel that basically what's being proposed is acceptable. And again, because it is on the rear elevation, not many people do go down that alley. Every so often I will go down that, but that's because I'm trying to get from City Hall over to the other street, but not all the time. So we did have a motion and a recommendation that we forwarded to you. A couple of other things that I wanted to bring up is that we've basically, we hope that you can make findings with regard to the exception to the ground floor transparency. Due to the fact that there is going to be an anticipated building, even though we don't have a timeline, I think it's appropriate that they not have to go through the additional expense to put windows there and then just have to take them out. And as you know, many of the buildings on 7th are all together, and there's not windows on many of those sides, but as you know, buildings have come down. The other thing that I wanted to comment on is the very excellent submittal. It is easy for us as a neighborhood, and I'm assuming for you, when you get all the information up front, and I wanted to acknowledge the fact that this building is really a good example of what we had in mind when we developed the design guidelines back in 2006. It is got a lot of elements that complement the existing buildings on 7th, but it's not trying to be a copy, but it is, again, complementary, and we think that's really good. And we're looking forward to it being constructed. The other thing I wanted to mention is that we really appreciated the fact that there was an elevation to see how the building relates to the other buildings in context is just really important, and I complimented Todd on the step up. I thought that putting the 1-story next to the other building really kind of, again, fit in very well, and it's very symmetrical, and it all, again, maybe in 100 years when it's still there, people will say, hey, that was a really good job. I just hope that we can get more submittals that are at least up to this standard, because it just makes it so easy when you can see it and you can explain it to somebody because it's right there in front of you. So other than that, I want to thank you for allowing us to participate in this, and we are looking forward to this great design. It did come a long way from the original concept, but I think this is really good and meets all the design guidelines for new construction in the McLaughlin Conservation District. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Can I have the applicant back up for a sec? Hey, Todd.
I did not pay her.
No, I have to agree. I will say this. I will agree with everything Denise said. Everything's very organized, and when I see Iceland on there, it's really not much of an issue of how organized things are. So it's always great. But the CMU on that side with the flush joints, is that just going to be regular old CMU?
Painted.
Just painted, just regular CMU, not sanded CMU or nothing like that. Okay, that's what I wanted to ask.
No, and we're, obviously on a budget like everyone, and thinking that this is hopefully going to be a 10-year facade. That's
Right,
that decision.
with the billboard. Okay, thanks. Is there anybody else? We don't have anything else, right? So I can close this.
Yeah, if nobody
Okay,
else wants
then
to speak.
I'm gonna close the public hearing, and then we can talk amongst ourselves.
I think that Clear Channel is talking about taking down that billboard and trying to combine that with another one, so that may go away definitely within the next 10 years or so, if the owner doesn't make them take it away to put up a new building. I'm not really bothered by the side elevation. It's not great, but they're hoping to build onto it as soon as possible. And I'm also just in general not a large fan in putting a decorative trellis or other element on there just to take it off in a few years. We talked about the same thing with Mike's Drive-In, about whether or not in the design review technically they should have had some ornament on the side of that building, and they would have had to get an easement to go across the property line, and I just feel like that's not necessarily appropriate. This, historically is fitting. You go right up to the property line and have a flush wall. But
So you're saying it wouldn't need to be there? Nothing would be there?
yeah, I saw those trellises and thought, oh, well, they're going to put vines on the side to try and get the
Soften
design
it.
review guideline and soften that side, which is a nice touch. But yeah, I don't.
Unnecessary, you think?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think windows on the ground floor are necessary. The front elevation is pretty elegant, and they did a lot of brick, and
Yeah,
they
the
have a
brick's
nice,
cool.
very nice cornice, and with the herringbone pattern, I think it all flows around pretty well. The back,
Yeah.
it is kind of what it is. I think they put enough into the front that they deferred the back, and that was a wise choice.
Oh, absolutely.
And though it could be dressed up or ornamented a little bit more, I'm not opposed to the panel in the back. It makes a nice base to set that
So
back facade down.
the trellises could be a option, is what you're saying?
Well, I think they're going to
Or-
have to have that at least to get through design review. So,
You can
Okay.
basically say the Historic Review Board does not see the trellises as
Necessary.
necessary.
Yeah.
and will defer
Criteria.
to
Mm.
yeah.
Either way, it's not part of your evaluation for reducing that transparency.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't see them as necessary.
Bob, do you have any?
No, I'm good with it. I mean, I'm not enamored with the board and bat on the back, but I understand why, and it's acceptable.
I think cars are going to be looking at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think with the trellis, I think it's more of a, how do we soften this wall, but that billboard's going to be the main detractor anyway,
Mm-hmm.
as it is now. Awning. Ornamented. Okay. Well, so if we make a motion, then we need to have a finding for eliminating those, which,
It's a finding of supporting the applicant's
Right.
request for modification during the site plan design review process.
which in that motion, the finding could be something, I don't know, do you want me to come up with something?
The proposed site elevation is historically appropriate.
Knowing that future development is going to,
But not only that,
Yeah.
but it's tied to, this was a traditional approach to historic buildings.
I think historically, if someone was going to put this building up 100 years ago, they wouldn't have put any windows there.
Mm-hmm.
That's-
And
That's the finding.
and that's my finding. That's all I can think is
Yeah.
historically that, yes, I've seen historic buildings with windows on the second floor, but eventually those get covered up one way or the other, and so that would be the historic finding that. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, and secondly, that the trellises, it's not trellis, what is that?
Yeah,
Oh,
there was
it's
some metal
trellis.
trellis.
Yeah.
Is also not required to be historically appropriate.
Yeah,
It's
it is
optional.
an optional element
It's
as
an
part of the site.
optional
plan.
element.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
The site plan design review still may require it, but the fact that the historic review board is not seeing it as part of your analysis.
Yeah, because I think they're doing what historically was done 100 plus years ago. Is someone's putting up a building and they know someone's going to put one up next to them, and why would I want to make that full of windows?
Would have left the ivy grew up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And the building is respectful, looking at the front facade, is very respectful to its context, but isn't mimicking really anything.
Mhm.
And so I think I just want
Yeah.
to throw that out there. That's very nice.
so could we make a motion with all that stuff?
Absolutely.
Does someone want to make a
So
motion?
moved?
Does
Seconded.
someone- Second? Okay, so we can call for a vote.
Derek Metzen,
Aye?
Bob Stewart,
Aye.
Chair McLaughlin.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, there you go.
And we had a gentleman, did you, Bob, we missed public comment? Are you good? Okay.
Okay, so we're done. I always say, go forth and spend.
Labor.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Denise.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Christina. Go home.
We all did
Go home to
good.
your birthday boy.
Well, he's already asleep, but, you know.
Oh.
Aw.
Okay, he's in his pajamas getting ready.
It's time to party.
Exhibit A.
Are we done? Did you call?
We're done. We're
Okay.
called dead. Meeting's over.